Of course, in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates Defense Ministry spokesperson has said that 3 people have been killed and 68 injured across the UAE by Iranian attacks. The spokesperson has stated that the country possesses strategic reserves of artillery capable of fending off aerial threats for an extended period. They emphasised that the UAE will not tolerate any infringement on its sovereignty or the safety of its land. The spokesperson made it clear that the nation's defence capabilities are robust and any threats to its territorial integrity will be met with firm resistance. The spokesperson underlined the UAE's commitment to safeguarding its borders and its national security. Joining us now is Dr. Asta Chatter, an Associate Professor of International Relations at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan. Thank you so much, Dr. Chatter, for joining us. The language there coming out of the United Arab Emirates, what does that signify? Stressing that it has these strategic reserves of artillery capable of defending itself, and also saying that it will not tolerate any infringement of its sovereignty or its land. Of course, this follows a joint statement released by a flurry of Gulf countries and the United States condemning Iran's strikes across the Gulf. What do you think the UAE is signifying with this message?
Right. I mean, the stance, as you mentioned, of UAE as well as the other countries that were hit by Iranian missiles or their drones was simply that they will continue to uphold whatever their stance is with regard to this conflict, which is they were not part of it directly. Most of them never allowed their airspace to be used against Iran, and hence they should be left out of the conflict. And by stating that they have capabilities, of course, they want to signal to the Iranian regime or the interim regime at this moment that they would be willing to go to whatever lengths necessary given their capabilities to defend their territory. I mean, let's not forget that some time ago when these attacks had just begun, there was no report of loss of lives. There were reports of series of attacks on infrastructure in these countries, but not necessarily loss of life. Now, loss of life does here complicate things. On one hand, however, we need to also understand that none of these countries, including UAE, want to really enter into a conflict and then jeopardize their investment and their economic prospects at this point. So they would want to, withhold or exercise restraint in terms of retaliation. But at the same time, this signaling was very important, both domestically and internationally, to project that they are still very capable states that can independently also, uphold their sovereignty.
Indeed. Where do these Gulf countries lie when it comes to conflict? You've seen the likes of Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, as we've mentioned, along with Oman. The entire Gulf region has been struck. At least there's been some hostilities being there. Qatar as well. How does one go about navigating in assessing how these countries might respond, and particularly if we see fatalities like we've seen in the United Arab Emirates here?
Of course, I mean, this would vary depending on how and to what extent these states have been impacted. Of course, I mean, the region on the whole is in a mess. But, amongst these states also, there is a clear difference in the way they are approaching this conflict. For instance, on one hand, you have countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, who have clearly steered away from this conflict. Even before it began, they had their stance very clear. They do not support their airspace to be used for any of these conflicts or any of the attacks on Iran. At the same time, they were not supportive of the Iranian regime. Neither were they very, very content with the development or in some way proliferation of nuclear capabilities in Iran. And that had constantly been a bone of contention amongst these states. And then you also have another group of states like Oman, who we've seen were very engaged as a third party, as a neutral player there, trying to navigate, the initial talks that were occurring between United States and Iran and the kind of negotiations that eventually went nowhere. But Oman was one of those neutral players as a mediator. So they were trying to play a very safe role, and now we see Oman also in some way dragged into this conflict. So looks like currently for Iran, from an Iranian perspective, none of these states are completely out of the purview of potentially being attacked, because in one way or another they have either been complacent with regard to the US or Israeli military operations, or they have very openly shown support towards the US operations or the Israeli operations in Iran. And either way, that puts them strictly against or contrary to the Iranian position. And that is pretty much what is going to in some way chart the future course of the conflict, as to what is the understanding of all of these states with regard to where should they draw the line with regards to retaliation.
Indeed. Dr. Chatter, do stay with us as we turn elsewhere in the Middle East to Lebanon next. A series of